My name's Nikita, and welcome to Wolf Studio. In this video, I'm going to be building a modern interpretation of a dresser and attempting to push it beyond the definition of furniture and into the realms of art. Now, I wouldn't call myself someone with a particular talent for making art. In fact, I find it incredibly difficult sometimes. But it's something I want to get better at, and something I want to integrate into my furniture. This project is my first step on that journey. First, I should probably give you a clearer idea of what I'm making. With this design, I've taken what you'd classically consider a dresser and stripped it right down to its essence. A rectangle with 4 lines on top. The only elements to balance such a harsh set of shapes are the chamfers and gentle tapers on the base and shelves. I've done this for 2 reasons. Not only does it keep the design minimal, an aesthetic that I really like, but more importantly, it also ensures that there's nothing to visually clash with the drawer fronts, as those will be the focal point of the piece. But we'll get to those later. So far you've been watching me build all the drawer boxes, and with them done, I'm now moving on to making the carcass of the cabinet. If you're someone who knows anything about cabinet building, you'll know that typically you'd build the big box first, and then all the smaller ones to fit inside it. So, why am I shuffling the process? Well, it's because I really hate waste, and I had a lot of plywood scraps to use. So I decided that I'd make the largest drawer boxes I could with the scraps, and then build the cabinet around them. As I'm also using plywood for the carcass, the only joinery that really makes sense is mitered corners and dominoes. And yes, I didn't need to use a domino. I could have gone for splines or dovetail keys to reinforce the mitered corners. But remember the design. I'm going for super minimal for everything but the drawer fronts, and that includes no visible joinery. After completing the carcass, I moved on to the hardwood components. I've chosen ash for the base and shelves, and sycamore for the drawer fronts. My process for choosing materials looks more like an algebra equation than a recipe. Let me explain. Conventionally in woodworking, you'll design a piece of furniture, and based on that design, you'll figure out a cut list, or, in other words, an ingredients list for a recipe. I do things a little bit differently though. I approach a project by considering a number of different factors, each one of them influencing the outcome of the other. If I have certain materials in the workshop that I want to use, then that will influence the design. If I have a certain budget, then that will influence the materials and build process. You get the idea. So all these factors go round and round in circles in my head until I figure out a way to optimize each one of them, similar to an algebra equation with multiple variables. Now, I'm not saying I'm unique in this. To be honest, most woodworkers will probably do this to some degree. I'm just highlighting it because I like this approach more. It turns the design and making process from something rigid and linear into something fluid and circular, and there's something extremely satisfying about that. In this case, my material choice was based on stock that I had in my workshop, minimizing cost. After all, this is an experimental project, so I'm not about to spend thousands on it, and what was available at the sawmill. Right now, I'm making the base of the cabinet. Its construction is super simple, just 4 components, 2 feet and 2 stretchers connected by lap joints, which you're seeing me mark up now. I'll cut them on the table saw, slicing out most of the material, and then clean them up with a chisel and router. Prior to this, you saw me glue up a couple of boards, then slice them up widthways, then glue them up again to make some thick blocks. Those will be the 2 feet. Woodworking can be pretty ruthless. No matter how simple or straightforward the component is, a moment of inattention can be a costly mistake. Fortunately though, woodworking can also be very forgiving, and most mistakes can be fixed. When cutting the lap joint on one of the feet, I lined up the table saw blade on the wrong side of the knife line, and just like that, the lap joint was 3mm too wide. To fix this, I cut a 3mm slice of one of the offcuts, and slid it into the gap nicely with some glue, and no one was ever any the wiser, except all of you now. Funnily enough, I also made a mistake when choosing the material for the shelves. Actually, let me rephrase that in the words of someone wise. We don't make mistakes around here. We have happy accidents. See, when choosing the boards for the shelves, one of the boards had 2 small portions of live edge that I thought I'd be able to cut around, and still have enough material to get the shelf width that I wanted. I was wrong, and not even by a little. I was wrong by a lot. On top of that, there was another surprise that I had to deal with. If you've never worked with ash, then you might not know it can have some pretty extreme color variants. The sapwood is a beautiful golden cream color, which is the color primarily associated with ash. The heartwood, on the other hand, can darken into beautiful shades of caramel brown. And as lovely as this is, it can make ash tricky to work with, especially if you are someone who likes homogeneous color in your furniture. So, naturally, the fates gave me one of each. A sapwood board that wasn't wide enough for my needs, and a heartwood board that would stick out like a sore thumb. In this situation, you have 2 options. 1, go and buy more material to get the color and size you need for the project. And 2, which I think is a bit more fun, go with the flow and figure out how to make it work. I really didn't want to buy more material. So after some time staring at the boards, I realized that by ripping both boards down the middle and swapping the halves, I would create 2 shelves, each with one half dark and one half light. So with one small adjustment, I went from having 2 unusable boards to 2 shelves that not only met the requirements, but also introduced another point of interest into the piece. These kinds of things don't always work out, but when they do, they make the project all the more satisfying. So with that hiccup resolved, the rest of the shelf construction was fairly straightforward. I'm using 100mm dominoes to hold the shelves and uprights together, with each domino skewering through the shelf and into the uprights above and below it. As with any process in woodworking though, there are multiple alternative methods that you could use to achieve this, and the only reason to use a domino is that it's fast and easy to maintain accuracy without sacrificing strength. If you don't have a domino, don't worry, all you need is a router, some jigs, and a bit of time, and you can achieve exactly the same results. With the shelves done, all I have left to do is connect the 3 main components, the base, the carcass, and the shelves, and I'll do this using bolts and threaded inserts. This is a big piece of furniture, and I need it to be able to come apart into manageable sized pieces for transport, or else I'll never be able to get it from my workshop into my bedroom. After threading and bolting, all that's left to do will be to make the drawer fronts, and this is where the drama of the project began. In the time leading up to this project, I'd been battling with a growing feeling of discontent with my work. I would find myself going into autopilot when designing new pieces, and relying on the same shapes and styles. The result was furniture that no longer excited me. And so, from the outset of this project, I knew I wanted to push my creative limits and try something new. The trouble with trying something new is that it can be really difficult to decide on what you want to try. So, where do you start? Well, I'd say the first thing to do is get rid of the idea that you don't have enough skill to try something. I think this holds back a lot of people from attempting new projects, and I've certainly shied away from certain designs because I felt I was underskilled to take them on. The reality is, doing anything outside of your comfort zone requires two things: time, and the acceptance that you will make mistakes and the final result won't be perfect. I can only say this now after having learned the hard way. My second piece of advice, and I believe this applies to all fields of creativity and art, is if you like something, whether that be a painting or a book, a film, or a piece of furniture, try to understand why you like it. This will do two things. It'll help you build your confidence when designing or creating your own work, and it'll help you create work that you find meaningful. I've always been fascinated by textures. To me, they have something of a magical quality. I love how you can look at a textural pattern up close and appreciate every line or dot, and then as you step back, they begin to blend into shapes and patterns, until at some point they all morph into a kind of visual noise that distorts your perception of the material. And so I decided that it was finally time to experiment with textural carving. With such a large canvas, the chest of drawers measuring about 1.8 meters wide and 0.9 meters tall, that's 6 feet by 3 feet for my American friends out there, it seemed like a wasted opportunity just to carve one texture across the whole cabinet. I figured that the more textures I could carve into these drawer fronts, the more I'd learn. And so, in my mind, the only logical thing to do was to create an image made up of different textural elements. Creating the image of the drawer fronts was by far the hardest part of the project for me. Not because I can't draw or I don't have any inspiration. My problem was perfectionism. See, the more time I put into this project, the more I felt like the final result had to be perfect. If any of you out there are perfectionists, in whatever occupation or craft, you'll know the feeling of anxiety and discontent that arises every time you get close to finishing what you're working on. It's that feeling that it can be better, and if you don't make it better, then you've failed. That feeling is the killer of creativity. Even after drawing sketches over and over again, I still had decision paralysis. I'd produced multiple designs that I liked, but I couldn't tell which one was the best, and because I didn't know which one was best, I felt like none of them were perfect. So when the time came to start carving, I had to let go. I had to embrace the shapes that felt right in the moment and fight back the doubts that tried to creep in with each decision that I made. I spent hours upon hours carving. It was a process that on the one hand seemed endless, but on the other hand never failed to send me into a meditative calm, a state in which time would slip by unnoticed. And then one day, I was done. All that I had left to do was attach the drawer fronts, and the project that had consumed months of my life would be finished. I would love to say that when I finished the piece, I loved it, and it had turned out exactly how I had imagined. The truth is in fact the opposite. I hated it, and I spent the rest of the week in a foul mood. I couldn't tell what I'd done wrong, but the piece in front of me wasn't the piece that I'd imagined. In hindsight, I think this is a classic case of having looked at something for so long that your perception of that thing switches from beautiful to ugly. Kind of like when you say a word one too many times, and then you realize how weird that word actually is. Listening back to this voiceover, it sounds kinda depressing, but trust me, it's not. Exploring new avenues of creativity can be difficult and uncomfortable, but the skills you learn, and more importantly, the things you learn about yourself, make it more than worth it. I've lived with this piece in my bedroom for over a year now, and it brings me joy every day. With the push-to-open drawer slides and textured drawer fronts, make it a joy to use. The image changes subtly throughout the day as the sun moves through the sky, and at night, my partner's bedside lamp casts a warm glow across the piece. I know it's not perfect, but it represents a significant milestone, and that's far more important. What's the saying? To make an omelette, you have to break a few eggs? When it comes to making art of any kind, you need to embrace failure. Art comes from inside us, and it forces us to expose ourselves to judgment and criticism. Fearing this will push you to create mediocrity, something that people neither hate nor love, something safe. Kind of like a glass of apple juice, a drink that no one hates, but also no one loves. Embracing failure will free you up to create your own unique cocktail. And yes, some may spit it out and say it's disgusting, but those who like it will absolutely love it. My main goal for this year, 2025, is to create artistic furniture without the fear of failure. I know that if I keep letting perfectionism control me, I'll never make something that I'm happy with, and wouldn't that be a sad life? If you've made it this far, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll be sharing my creative journey here with you all and making furniture that pushes me to my limits. If that's something you might be interested in, then you know where the subscribe button is. I'll also be posting videos on my Patreon that talk in detail about the techniques I use both in designing and building my pieces, and if that's of any interest to you, then the link is in the description. Okay, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of the video with some gentle piano. Thank you, and see you in the next one.